Dry beans are a foundational item in a prepper's pantry. Do you know the secret to turning these into delicious, nutritious meals? Hi, I'm Sam, and I'm a Provident Prepper. The pandemic is changing our lives. I've been in Alaska, but the crazy world that we live in has required that I come back to my home with my family. I'm currently under a 14-day quarantine. We've eaten well because my mom knows how to make the best out of basics, such as dry beans from our food storage. In this video, my mom's going to teach you how to make those same delicious, nutritious meals out of those dry beans from your food storage. Check it out.
A worldwide pandemic has affected almost every aspect of our life. Once we were able to go out to restaurants and socialize with each other, and that lifestyle is no longer available to us. The fresh foods in our refrigerator and pantries are starting to be diminished. Many of us are looking for creative ways to use the staples that we have in our pantry to create the wonderful restaurant meals that we used to be able to enjoy. And in this quick video today, I'm going to show you how to make delicious meals from the dried beans that you have in your storage. I hear so many people say that cooking dry beans is complicated and they just don't know how to do it. And it's so not true. Cooking dry beans is incredibly simple, and I'm going to teach you exactly how to do it. The first thing that you want to do is sort through your dried beans. Dried beans may have little dirt clods or rocks or broken beans, things that you wouldn't want to eat that can't be mechanically sorted during the process. And so it's really good just to lay out those beans and look through them and remove anything that you don't want to eat. The next step is to rinse the beans really well because they were grown outside and they will be covered with dirt. Rinse them really well and cover them with about 3 inches of water and let them soak overnight. Sometimes really old beans have a hard time softening up in the cooking process. If you are cooking with really old beans, it can be helpful to add a teaspoon of baking soda to that soaking water. Basic important tips about cooking with dry beans. The first tip is that you should discard your soaking water. If you cook beans in fresh water, it tends to reduce the gas that is produced during digestion of the beans. And since our family is all confined into the home together, we would appreciate as little gas as possible. Another important tip is that you should add salt, sugar, or acidic foods like tomatoes after the beans are already tender. If you add them at the beginning, sometimes those beans just will never soften up. And then if you add a tablespoon or 2 of oil or fat, it will reduce the foaming that occurs. In this photo, you can see that I've put those black-eyed peas into a slow cooker to begin the process, but I put a ham hock in right at the beginning. That does not affect the way that the beans soften up, but it creates a really flavorful broth. I am a huge fan of cooking in a slow cooker. However, pressure cooking beans is an incredible way to accomplish it. If you pressure cook your beans, soaking is optional. You can or you don't have to. I usually do anyway, but if I'm in a hurry and that's what choice I have, I'll use my pressure cooker. It reduces cooking time significantly, and pressure cooking will soften old hard beans that will never get soft in a slow cooker. When I cook beans in the pressure cooker, I completely cover them with water with about 2 to 3 inches of water on top of the beans. And then I like to add just a little bit of oil or fat so that it doesn't foam as much inside the pressure cooker. Once those beans are tender, then it's time to add the other ingredients and simmer until all the flavors are blended. Salt is a basic ingredient that will change bland beans into something flavorful and delicious. So if you have nothing else besides beans, water, and salt, you can totally make them edible and delicious. There are basic aromatics that will just make the flavor of beans pop, and my favorites are onions and garlic. I like to saute them in a little bit of fat before I add them to my beans. As I mentioned at the beginning of this video, a lot of us are starting to have holes in our pantry, and we might not have all of the ingredients that we would like to have in order to make our favorite recipes. Just because you don't have an ingredient that your original recipe called for doesn't mean that you can't make that recipe and that it will be delicious. Think about this. You can use fresh, frozen, canned, dried, and freeze-dried. So when we talk about the aromatics, especially like the onions and the garlic, well, yeah, I can use fresh onions, and that's my favorite, but I always keep dehydrated onions. And if I add those dehydrated onions to my beans, it still provides a great flavor. And the same thing goes with spices. I love to use fresh spices in a lot of my recipes. However, dried spices work just fine. And if you are out of one spice, be brave. Let's try another. See what you can create using what you still have in your pantry. And you can use a variety of fats. A lot of recipes will call for the onions to be sautéed in bacon grease because the bacon and the pinto just creates this really delicious flavor together. However, you can use olive oil or vegetable oil or any kind of fat that you have to do that same thing. The flavor is going to change just a little bit, but that's really okay. If you don't have meat, leave it out of the recipe altogether. Many of these recipes are delicious in a vegetarian version. If you're using raw meat, I really like to brown it before I add it to the dish. If I'm using canned meat, I'll wait until the beans are tender when I'm adding all the spices and things and just going to let it simmer. And that's when I would add my canned chicken so that it maintains the texture. It's okay to be creative and substitute different items or even omit one completely if you don't have that item in your pantry. One of our very favorite staple bean recipes is just refried beans. And quite frankly, all you need is pinto beans and salt. If I'm wanting to keep the meal low fat, I will just take an immersion blender and blend the pinto beans until they just have some really cool texture and put some salt in them and call it good. However, refried beans are really good if after the beans are tender, you put a little bit of fat or oil inside of a pan and kind of use a wooden spoon and smash them against the side. Refried beans could be a great option when your pantry is getting low, as long as you have pinto beans and salt. Another favorite in our family is a Chevy's Copycat pinto bean recipe. It's a very basic, tasty bean recipe. We'll serve this recipe just as a bowl of beans, or sometimes I'll take an immersion blender and I'll blend it up a little bit and we'll use it in place of refried beans, and it's just a really flavorful recipe. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take those pinto beans and I am going to cook them till they're tender. And then I'll chop up some pieces of bacon, or I'll just use oil, and I'll saute the onion and garlic and then put it in with those pinto beans. A can of chopped green chilies, a tablespoon of chili powder, 2 teaspoons of cumin, and a tablespoon of salt, and then just simmer it until those flavors blend. And it really is incredibly delicious, just using very basics. And I have substituted garlic salt in this recipe when I don't have cloves of garlic and reduced the amount of salt that I put in. And I have used dehydrated onions and dehydrated peppers. Now our son Rob is famous for his burrito bowls. He likes to just make black beans with salt. He uses the Instapot usually, and then we serve the black beans over cooked brown rice. In the big picture you see we have pico sauce and guacamole, and it's just to die for. However, you can eat it just plain beans and rice, or put salsa on top, or anything that you want. But this is the basic. It will feed you, it will fill your belly, and it is a good protein. Another option is southern black-eyed peas. If you don't have a ham hock to make the peas with, you can actually just use a little bit of bacon, or you could omit that altogether. If I'm using a ham hock, I will put the ham hock in with the water and dry beans and let that cook until they're tender. And then I'll add the remaining ingredients. Once it's all simmered together, I'll take out that ham hock and pull the remaining meat off of it and serve it. And if you note, the rice that we served with this actually had greens in it so that it was a southern style. This is Jonathan's favorite, Wendy's Copycat chili. We found this recipe years ago, and then we have adapted it until it's absolutely perfect for our family. I soak the pinto and the kidney beans overnight, and then I cook them till they're tender. In this recipe, then I drain that liquid off. Sometimes I will use hamburger in this recipe. Sometimes it's stew meat. I've even been known to just throw a small roast in. But whatever I'm using, I brown it with the onion, and then I put it in the the chili along with all of the remaining ingredients. The day that I did the roast, after it had simmered for a while and all those flavors were blended, then I took that roast out and cut it all up and returned it to the pan. Whatever you have to use. We've also used canned beef with this and added it toward the end when everything was simmering. Emalie is always known for serving the most delicious foods, and there are lots of different recipes for white chili out there. But this one is a basic one that really works well. You take your white beans, you soak them overnight, you add water, and you cook them till they're tender. Then you take the chicken and brown it with the onion and garlic in the oil. Add the can of corn with the juice. You don't want to waste that juice. And the green chilies, the bouillon cubes, then you're going to salt it to taste. This recipe calls for 1 to 2 cups of shredded pepper jack cheese. Oh, it's yummy. And you just put it in there like 15 minutes before you serve it and stir it until it's all melted and delicious. It's really creamy. But if you don't have that, you can just leave it out. It won't be as creamy, but it will still be a really good pot of white chili. This is a copycat recipe for Café Rio black beans over lime rice. It's super easy. You soak your black beans and then you cook them till they're tender. Take the onion and saute it, add the garlic and finish sauteing it. I only like to saute the garlic for about a minute or else it'll go bitter, but I like to saute the onion for a lot longer. So I do that first and then I add that garlic just about a minute before it's done. Now with this one, you want to drain all of the liquid off of those black beans and return it to your slow cooker. And then you're going to add all of the other ingredients, but the tomato juice will be your liquid. If you leave the cooking water in, it's just too liquidy. If you don't have cilantro, you can just omit it. If you hate cilantro, you can omit it too. And then it's served over lime rice, which is really easy to make. It's just white rice with lime juice and cilantro and salt. It's also really good if you use like a chicken bouillon base to it, but that's not at all necessary. And you can adapt this any way you need to so that you have the right ingredients. This is pinto bean chicken chili. You follow that same format. You soak the pinto beans, then you cook them till they're tender. You're going to brown your chicken. I love to use a Creole seasoning when I'm browning the chicken. It makes it taste really yummy. And then you just add all of these other ingredients and simmer it, and it turns out to be something spectacular. Remember, this is so easy. You can totally do that. If you've been afraid of that can of black beans that you have in your food storage, it's time to not be afraid anymore and create something delicious out of it. The steps are easy. You're going to sort it. Make sure that there's no rocks or anything nasty. You're going to rinse it. You're going to soak it overnight, and then you're going to cook those beans until tender. If you want, it can be in a slow cooker. It can be on the stovetop. It can be in a pressure cooker. Just cook them till they're tender. And if it has too much water after cooking, you might want to remove some of that. Add all of your other ingredients and continue simmering until it's perfect. The pandemic has really brought home the need for us to have food storage at home, and beans are part of our long-term food supply. If you want to learn more about how to build a long-term food supply, visit the Provident Prepper Long-Term Food Storage Creative Solutions to build a critical asset. And we created a video just a few days ago, Empty Pantry Soup Tips, that teach you how to make soup out of whatever it is that you have left in your pantry. And then there's a video you might be interested in, Survival Food Storage.
The closure of restaurants obviously hasn't affected our family very much. You too can work miracles with the power of dry beans. Now for the question of the day. What are your favorite recipes to use with dry beans? Comment them below. Thanks for being part of the solution.